On Friday, August 14th, 2026, retired Lieutenant Colonel Doug Wood, past president of the New Hampshire Sons of the American Revolution, gave an outstanding presentation at the Historical Society of Pittsburg, New Hampshire, on the important and often overlooked role New Hampshire played in the American Revolution. Doug highlighted New Hampshire's disproportionate contributions at the Battle of Bunker Hill, led by Colonel John Stark, while focusing much of his presentation on one of the most fascinating early aspects of the Revolution, the raid on Fort William and Mary at Newcastle, New Hampshire, in December of 1774. Doug made a special point of recognizing New Hampshire attorney and local historian Thomas Kerr, who was widely regarded as the foremost expert on the Fort William and Mary raid. His research has helped preserve and bring greater attention to this remarkable chapter of New Hampshire's history. Nearly 24 local residents turned out for the presentation, making for a lively and engaged audience. It was wonderful to see so many people interested in learning more about the revolutionary history that took place right here in New Hampshire. And the revolutionary spirit continued the very next day at the Pittsburgh Old Home Day. The New Hampshire Sons set up a tent and filled the town information booth with Revolutionary War period regalia, giving us an opportunity to share our knowledge and talk with local residents about New Hampshire's role in the founding of our nation. A big thank you to Doug Wood, Dennis Walsh, and the Historical Society of Pittsburgh, as well as everyone who came out to learn and participate. Please enjoy this presentation and help us continue telling the story of New Hampshire's revolutionary past.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Beautiful country up here, beautiful weather. So let's start. Everybody here over 16? You know, the rule in the 18th century in New Hampshire was 16 to 60, you were in the militia, eligible to be called up. Now, when they revised the statutes and and put in the new laws in the state, they kept that. But they did change it. It was men 16 to 60. Now it's anybody 16 to 60. Equal opportunity. And no age limit. Everybody has something to contribute. So congratulations, you are all in what's known as the unorganized militia, eligible to be called up at the behest of the governor for civil emergencies. Just want to make sure that everybody contributes, unless you have an excuse. I think our Korean War veteran has paid enough. See, as an excuse. None of us do. So even if you served in the military, you could be called up again. We're going to talk about something a little bit different for the people who live in the northern part of the state, who may have harvested trees to be sent down the mass roads to be shipped out to England, probably did trapping, hunting for furs, big business in New Hampshire. And most would have had little or no contact with the seacoast. Two really different areas in the state. So tonight we're going to talk about the seacoast and a major, you might call it pre-revolutionary activity down at the seacoast, which had long-lasting effects on the state. So we're talking about the Piscataqua River, but specifically the Piscataqua area, which was sort of a land in itself. It included Portsmouth, but it also included Kittery and that shore of Maine. They were all the same. They didn't really care much about what the Mass Bay Colony thought about it. They were an individual trading society. Always start with credit where credit is due. My buddy, Tom Kerr, has only studied this for 50 years. There's a lot, it can be quite complicated, and I've been beating on him for at least 10 to write a book. He's writing a book, so I'm looking forward to pushing the book when he ever gets it out. John Weaver, a friend of mine, I'm a member of the Coast Defense Study Group that looks at I had somebody ask what coast defense is. It sounds pretty self-explanatory. Big guns primarily, not there anymore, keeping alive what we had for defense of the coast. There are some installations still out down in the Portsmouth area that go back to defense of the coast with large guns. And John Weaver is sort of a professional in the Coast Defense Study Group. And Michael Janulis, he's a poet and author. He's actually from New Jersey. We'll forgive him that. But he's always been very interested in this. And he lives in Newcastle. He's the only guy that, in fact, has actually written a book. And so that's his book, The Shot Not Heard Around the World. And he wrote a poem to go with it. It's actually pretty good. I have a copy here to go in the either Historical Society's library, or you can put it in the community library. But you ought to have a copy. It's a pretty good overview of this that most people don't know anything about it. If you get down to Portsmouth today, this is what you'd see. This is actually mostly Civil War period. Most of the original parts of the fort are buried underneath this structure. From the coast, you can see some of the stoneworks and the batteries, all the rust from the Taunton shutters that were for the Civil War guns. There were coast water batteries, we call them, outside of the fort. They've all washed away over the decades. This is the environment we're talking about. This is the topography of the Portsmouth and Lower Piscataqua area. And particularly, we're going to be interested in, if I can find the thing here. Whoops. Find a pointer. Interested in this island. It has Fort Point on it, which is where you're entering the Piscataqua area. And it has Jerry's Point, which we'll talk about a little bit at the bottom. It is an island. There are no bridges. So it's, I don't know why the laser is not showing up on this. It is working. But Portsmouth is up in the upper left-hand corner. And you have a difficult way of getting into the harbor. The Piscataqua River has very high tides. It is a tidal river, fast-moving water, 2 directions, changes twice a day. You only go in the direction, in those days, that the water is flowing. In addition, this area up in, I can get this damn thing, I don't know why the laser's not showing up on there. We'll look at that a little bit on this other slide. Sort of shows how you get up into the Portsmouth area. And the interesting part is the Narrows here, up in the center. And that is Narrows, and it's tortuous. You cannot take a sailing ship, a big ship. You can take a small ship, but even most schooners you can't easily take. They can't tack in that area, and it's very narrow. So ships have to be towed by rowboats. Hard to attack someplace if you're being towed by rowboats. So there's natural defenses that most harbors do not have. And remember, this town, about 5,000 at the time, is a major trading port. The masts are going out of there to go to England. That's where a lot of the profit goes. But they're trading for everything with primarily England. Then you have down here called Great Island, then later called Castle Island. Castle is used in the traditional military sense. Castle does not mean a medieval fortress. It means a fortified area of any kind that's a fortified area, whether it's permanent or temporary. So you have at Fort Point, you have the fort, and they're looking at entrance of the Piscataqua, and that's where their interest is. Now, first fortified in 1631, fortified with 4 brass cannon. They were later taken out. So we're going through a period of fortified when we think we're going to have problems. It's not fortified when we don't think we're going to have problems. Later, the Royal Engineers in 1666 add stone ramparts to what's going to be the permanent fort. This is designed to be the main defense for the harbor. Increased in 1772 designed to have 60 guns, which is more than a frigate. That makes us the largest fortress north of New York. It has designs for 60 guns, has bastions with barbette seacoast guns at the top, barbette mounts, rotate on a pintle so that you can aim them differently in multiple directions. And they're all on truck carriages that are either cast iron or, in some cases, brass or even bronze. Whole mix. Now, the fort also has guns suitable for replacing guns on ships, because it has guns, for instance, up to 32-pound shot. And that's the lower deck gun of a ship of the line. So it's not something that you're going to use for most vessels. This is a diagram as it was rebuilt and named Castle William and Mary. It went through multiple names. You can see the fortifications and the flag. Flag is very important at this period. You need to have a large, very visible, very understandable flag so that so that sailors know where they are and where you are, where the port is. So the large flag enters into this story in an important way. That is the king's colors. In this case, at the time this was taken, it's strictly the Cross of St. George, which is the British flag at the time in the 17th century. And it's fully a very high pole in the fortification. Now, the artillery of this fort changes over time. We have cannon, muzzle-loading cannons for most of the early period. Now, this happens to be a diagram of a 6-pound gun on a field carriage. Field carriages are very important. That's going to enter into the picture later. That's the kind of carriage that you need if you're going to have mobile artillery, like supporting a battle in the field, as opposed to a fixed fortification. During the Civil War, it was designed for up to 200-pound rifled muzzle-loading cannon called Parrott rifles. They were working to build a 2-story fort, but they never got that finished. The war ended before they got that finished. Never fired a gun in anger at anybody. Then, for the First World War, and later in the Second World War, we had modern coast artillery. This is an 8-inch seacoast rifle on a disappearing mount. This thing, when it fires, let's see. Trying to get this thing in the right direction. Come on. When that fires, the gun lowers from the parapet so that you can't see where it is as a target. Even though you got this huge pile of smoke in front of it, you can't see it. We had guns along the coast up to 12 inches. Now, at Stark Park down on the coast, there are 2 casemates which did not have this kind of a mount. They mounted 12-inch seacoast rifles with a range of close to 30 miles. And they were designed in case we had enemy ships come towards Portsmouth. They're only fired twice. Guns are fired in what's called a proof firing when they're made to make sure that the rifle that works and won't blow up, fired with extra charge, and fired once when they're installed. They fired them when they were installed. They broke half the windows in Wentworth by the Sea, half the windows in Portsmouth, and the mayor of Portsmouth begged them not to fire those guns again unless they actually saw bad guys. They were never fired again. No bad guys. So, Portsmouth has a very secure harbor, a fort designed to make the harbor very secure. It also was both a royal and a provincial garrison arsenal. So it stored ammunition and weapons for the militia as well as for the use of the governor. The garrison had a permanent complement of captain and 5 men. Big amount, right? Big garrison. Typical of the period, you don't fully garrison the fort unless you are expecting real trouble. And the way the government works at that time, you have a governor, He's appointed by the king. He has all the government rests in him. New Hampshire does not have a charter like the Mass Bay Colony does. All the government functions rest in the governor himself. But the governor has a council. That council's members are appointed by the king. And they're to advise the governor and keep an eye on the governor, make sure he's doing what the king wants. He asked them for more money, for more men. They told him no. So he doesn't get to do everything. Now, the king's colors that we saw on the other diagram, 18 by 24 feet. This is a wool flag, wind blowing there all the time. This is a heavy piece of flag. We'll see what happens to it later. No charter, as I said. There are no regulars stationed in the state. And this is important. The Mass Bay Colony has regulars stationed there. In fact, they have major forces that end up in Boston. We don't have any. And we owe that in many respects to the fact that we don't have a charter. We're a business community. But also Governor Wentworth worked very hard to make sure there was no excuse to have the king station regular troops in the state. And that's important. It's easier to do things here than it is to do in Massachusetts. So we figure at the time about 40% of the state favors resistance to the king. We work normally by the rule of threes. A third of the population is loyalists, wants to remain loyal to the king, doesn't want things to change. A third of the population wants to rebel and form our own society. The other third of the population says, a pox on both your houses, leave us alone. Not interested in either. You have a small rural garrison we talked about, just 6 men, but you have effective leaders in the patriot cause. And one of the most notable ones is John Langdon of Portsmouth, who is a ship captain, and he's very active in promoting freedom and planning for what to do if things go downhill. So the British are occupying Boston. Started in 1768, reinforced later. The guy in charge is Governor General Gage. He now assumes the position of both governor and general. The Intolerable Acts, issued after the Boston Tea Party, in fact, contain a number of things. But one of the things it does is nullify the royal charter in Boston, in the Mass Bay Colony. That means now Governor General Gage, he's in charge of everything. Now, in September 74, we have a powder alarm, meaning somebody's coming to take the gunpowder that belongs to us. And that's in Somerville, Massachusetts, because there are a lot of protests. General Gage is concerned with disorder, and he said, well, maybe we ought to take some of this stuff away from the local militia. So he sends a team to the Somerville Powder House. They take everything. That raises a huge hue and cry. And with all in all, he was just testing the waters. He puts the powder back. Well, maybe not the right time, but he hasn't forgotten that. All right, we have a provincial assembly. Now that is locally elected, presided over by the governor, but it is our people. It's not appointed by the king, and it's becoming increasingly radical. We have some more chairs down front, right down front here, free, no charge. Be my guest. But the key is, in the following month, in October, the king, having learned about all of the major protests, issues an order in council forbidding the import of arms and ammunition into the colonies. Now, one thing you have to remember, there are no gunpowder mills in the colonies. The king forbids it. So all the gunpowder has to be imported, or from us, begged, borrowed, or stolen primarily. That is interpreted by General Gage is authority to act and to go start seizing military stores that might be used by the militia. So, Governor Wentworth, good guy, wrong place, wrong time. Governor Wentworth, his father is Benning Wentworth, a longtime governor appointed by the king of the province of New Hampshire. Crooked as the day is long. His nephew is John Wentworth, not as crooked. Nice guy. Born in New Hampshire, likes New Hampshire, popular with the population. He's a nice guy, makes a good governor. Wrong time. Doesn't fit with what's going on at that point. He opposes the Stamp Act very publicly. The Stamp Act is one of the key acts by the king that really gets everybody's goat because it affects everyone. Any piece of paper of any kind has to have a tax stamp on it. So you have cases where the tax man is tarred and feathered and run out of town, where hanged in effigy, and lots of protests associated with the Stamp Act. Very unpopular in New Hampshire because it affects everybody. This is a little bit information about him. John Langdon, our guy, Portsmouth, former sea captain. He's an import-export merchant. He later has, he's part of the Friends of Liberty. He helps form that. That is our name for the Sons of Liberty that's being used in Boston. And he becomes a major driver of resistance and plays a major role later in the Revolution itself. Now, John Sullivan is commander of the militia in Portsmouth. Now, one thing that you ought to know about the militia in Portsmouth, the militia has the same problem that the rest of the country has. It has divided loyalties. Remember, the business of New Hampshire is business, and the business community of Portsmouth is very concerned about what happens because they're interested in making a profit, and resistance to the king doesn't help that any. John Sullivan is not, at this time, at the beginning, in favor of rebellion. He's commander of the militia in Portsmouth, but he's also the commander for the rest of the militias in the towns in the state. He plays a major role, changes, and becomes a general in the Continental Army, serves in the Continental Congress, ends up governor of New Hampshire, totally on the other side from where he starts. Paul Revere. Everybody knows who Paul Revere is, right? Paul Revere is a complicated guy. Silversmith, bell maker, engraver, excellent propagandist, military courier, dentist, lousy military guy. Everybody know about the Penobscot campaign later, 77? The Penobscot campaign was an attempt to stop the British from building a fort at Penobscot Bay in what is now Maine. And an exercise put together by the General Court of Massachusetts to drive the British out of the area of Penobscot Bay. So they put together a large fleet of ships to go up and capture the area, which is difficult because it's inside a bay controlled with by a narrow opening to the bay. Now, they didn't do well. They made Paul Revere in charge of the artillery. Nah, it didn't work. In fact, they were going to court-martial him afterwards. Now, this exercise, which included a ship, a colonial frigate, that they impressed in the service to go up there, they lost all the ships, 100%. Largest naval defeat prior to Pearl Harbor. So they were going to court-martial Paul Revere, but they decided not to because under the excuse that they took the colonial frigate, well, maybe we can get the Continental Congress to pay the $1.3 million equivalent of what we paid for this debacle called the Penobscot Bay can to me. They've been trying this for a long time, you know. No, they didn't get any money. Didn't get any money. But they tried, so Paul Revere sort of gets off. But Paul Revere worked for the Committee of Correspondence in Boston. Now, there are two committees. It's a Committee of Safety, which is concerned with military affairs. There's a Committee of Correspondence, which is interested in information and warnings to the various members of the colonies. They received word that, they received word that the British, after this order from the king, is putting together two ships, preparing two ships to come up the coast. They're not sure what they're going to do. Are they going to take the stores out of William and Mary, or are they going to reinforce William and Mary with regular troops? But they know they're coming. Paul Revere rides nonstop, 66 miles, in the middle of the night, in very, very cold weather. Now remember, you don't have any I-93 to come up from Boston. This is the end of what's known as the Little Ice Age, where we have abnormally cold temperatures in the northern hemisphere over quite a long period of time. Long history of what that causes. But it's bitterly cold, snow and ice. Lucky horse didn't lose footing. They suffer, could have had anything could have happened to make that ride not be completed. But he completes it. It is his only successful ride. His ride for Lexington and Concord ends just after Lexington, between Lexington and Concord, where he's captured. And he doesn't complete it. Now, you wouldn't necessarily know that if you listen to grammar school at the learned Paul Revere's ride, the poem, it's great, Paul Revere's ride. Anybody know why that poem was written? Just to remember Paul Revere?
Inspire patriotism?
It was written as a recruiting tool for the Civil War because they needed an American hero from the Revolution in New England to help in recruiting for the Civil War. That's why that poem was written. He arrives on the 13th of December with news. He stays for a week. And we'll find out how we know that later. Now let's talk the other side. Captain John Cochrane. He is the commander of the fort. Former sea captain, appointed commander of the militia, the provincial militia that commands the fort. He's very, very loyal to the governor, but he knows everybody. You know, this is not a big community. He knows everybody. He is a member of the Masonic Lodge with the rest of them, most of the members. His wife is Sarah Foss. Sarah Foss is a woman of very unique characteristics, and my buddy Tom Kerr's book is really about Sarah Foss. You can write a whole book about her. But to do that, you have to explain the environment of Portsmouth at this time. Even when she's a prisoner in the fort, she's collecting tariffs of ships coming in. I mean, she's a tough customer. She lives a tough life, does very well for herself. We know what some of the other defenders were, some of the names. Defenders, other than Captain Cochrane, serve only a year, and then they're replaced. They're permanent militia, but only permanent for a year. And Sarah Cochrane, on the 14th, assists her husband in defending the fort. Now we have Lieutenant Henry Mowat. Now, Mowat he's a permanent Navy captain. He commands HMS Canso. Now, HMS Canso becomes an important player in this whole mission. His job is hydrographic survey of the East Coast. That means he knows every inlet, he knows all the depths. He's the one building the information for the maps. The first map we looked at that had all the trees on it, that's a 1790 map. And the data on it was compiled by Henry Mowat. He's also a revenue cutter. So his job is interdicting smuggling. Smuggling is a big business, particularly in Rhode Island. That's all they did. And so they're smuggling to escape duties to the king, and the job of these revenue cutters is to stop that, and Henry Moore is one of the guys. So the Canso, that's his ship. We're not quite sure exactly how it's rigged. Sloops come in many forms. That's a sloop pictured there, could very well be it. His sloop is out with 9-pound cannon and swivel guns, 8 of each. And so he actually keeps his ship in Kittery, Maine, because he doesn't want to go through the rigmarole of getting it up to Portsmouth. So he smells smaller craft into Portsmouth to get supplies and do trading with him. But he reports to Admiral Graves, who is in charge of all of the Royal Navy on the East Coast. So, the beginning. It's an assault. Whether it's a battle, you can interpret it in different ways. Graves is going to support the Order in Council to seize stores to prevent smuggling them. On the 4th of December, under his tutelage, the frigate Scarborough arrives. I forgot to put the number of guns in there, I guess, or I took it out accidentally. It's got larger guns. It's got 9-pounders and a few larger guns. Now, during this period, you have increased the number of military in Boston. Gage is really building up an army in Boston. They have a lot of deserters. Armies and navies of that period often had deserters for lots of reasons. There is an exception. Exception occurs in Portsmouth later. The end of the war, when Rochambeau brings troops for the Battle of Yorktown, half the fleet anchors in Portsmouth. Doubles the size of Portsmouth. They have to forage for 300 miles to get food to feed that fleet. That fleet had no deserters. Any idea why they might be an exception? The fleet's all French ships. Every ship has a priest. They're all Catholic. There's a French-speaking community they could disappear into. Well, actually, there isn't. Because the French-speaking community here was Huguenot, which is French Protestant. And they remember the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day by Louis XIV, when they killed all the Huguenots. Huguenots had fled. These were families that had fled France. So if they had tried to mix with the population would have turned them in. Being a deserter and being turned in is not a pleasant affair. So they didn't have any deserters, which is really an exception. Now, the Army, they get a lot of reserves. So Wentworth is policing these folks up because he's trying to keep any excuse, get rid of any excuse for Gage to station troops permanently in New Hampshire. Puts them in Fort William and Mary, and then they get picked up by a ship to be taken back to Boston and whipped. During this time, the next day, Rhode Island moves their military hardware and stores from their coastal forts inland. That gets Gage's attention, that action is taking place. So they start meeting in a tavern in Boston. And on December 12th, Langdon advises that they might have to remove the fort's powder. Now, why might we want to just remove the fort's powder? In this case, we're not talking about military resistance, because we think the powder is ours. We charge tariffs for foreign ships coming into Portsmouth. Foreign ships like them nutmeggers out of Connecticut, or those Mass Bay people, or heaven forbid, them Canadians. They pay a fee. coming into Portsmouth. The fee is used to buy powder for the militia. So we think that that's ours. So you got to come to steal our stuff, not the king's stuff, our stuff. So they start hypothetically figuring, what would we do in the case we have to do something about that fort? Then on the 13th, Paul Revere arrives, and the word is, you have 24 hours. Oh, not 24 hours. Yeah, no, 48 hours, maybe 48 hours before ships come in. Now you got no time for planning. You also have no formal plan about what you're going to do. So they put together an exercise to take action. This is a fragmentary copy of Paul Revere's message to Portsmouth, 1774. The guy in California, cleaning out his father's papers, found this in the papers, and on the internet found Tom Kerr and asked about it. That's why we have an image of it. This went up for sale, and we were not able to get it. But that is part of the message. So how the Committee of Correspondence worked was, they, at the behest of the Committee of Safety, they write a message. The message goes out to whatever town or towns. Paul Revere takes that message to the Committee of Correspondence that we've established in Portsmouth. They read the message and communicate with the rest of the folks what the message says. Now they make copies of the message. And they write a note on the back of the copy from Portsmouth of what they did, and it goes out to a pre-selected sites. It's very much like a modern phone tree. You have some sort of emergency, you're tasked with calling 10 people, and your buddy's tasked with calling a different 10 people. That's how they spread the word. So this is actually an important historical document. This one we found also in California. This is Paul Revere's travel claim for his trip to Portsmouth. And by analyzing the travel claim and knowing the economy of the period, we deduce that Paul Revere was in Portsmouth during the entire period of the raids. There is no evidence that he actually participated. He sat in the tavern and drank and gave advice to all the other folks. He didn't participate in the raid. But this is a very rare document. We couldn't get that either. So now it begins. Cold weather. Very cold weather. I was across from Fort William and Mary for a commemoration last year. It was below freezing. Water, air coming in after water. Snowing. I never saw so cold in my life. You know, but it is a little bit colder than it was then. You've got to remember, the people participating in this are going to be over the water. They're going to get wet. There's ice everywhere. It is snowing. The wind is always blowing. Tough business. So how are we going to get this stuff out? Well, we're going to try to cajole the folks manning the fort, because we know there are only a few of them manning the fort. Maybe they'll let us take it because we say it's ours. Well, they try substitute it. Meetings, they're meeting with John Cochran and his wife, and they're trying to sneak their way in. But Cochran he's a professional. He does his job. He's not having any of this. So Langdon rallies the Patriots in Portsmouth. It does not include any of the Portsmouth militia. There's no formal militia associated with this. These are all citizens. In the afternoon, so now, remember, this is December. It's going to get dark by 4 o'clock. They go with 400 to the fort. And so they're outside the fort here, trying to get into the fort. No visible weapons. Some cudgels, sticks you can hit somebody with. No weapons. One of the myths is there's a pitched battle. Well, not really. There's no record of any firing of weapons on our side. Now, they haul the king's colors down. That is definitely treason. That will get you hanged, drawn, and quartered, because that is what you get for treason in the British. Anybody know of John Gove of New Hampshire? John Gove, one of the founders of the Ancient Honorable Artillery. He's one of my ancestors. He led a revolt against Governor Cranfield in the 17th century and was the only person in the colonies sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. But they decided maybe we can't do that, so they sent him for an all-expense-paid vacation to the Tower of London. Then they threw him out of the prison in London because he wasn't of the right class. And eventually he's pardoned by James II and comes back. We think he was locked in a closet as being a registered nut at that point in time. Now, as I said, there was no firing. A little bit, there's something that sort of intrudes on that. You call it firing or not. We got a guy with John Palmer. He takes out a pistol. Now, there probably were some pistols, small pistols. Sailing communities, more apt to have pistols. He points at one of the guards and he pulls the trigger, and nothing happens. And he cocks it and pulls it again, and nothing happens. So there's no, but that alone, threatening with a weapon one of the king's guards, is another treasonable offense. At the same time, his son is hauling down the king's colors. That's another treasonable offense. Now, everybody knows who these guys are. We don't know everybody who was on these raids. We figure over a couple of days, as many as 1,000 people participated, of which we know names of about 150. One of the reasons is there is no sign-up sheet for treason, because you don't want the sign-up sheet to get in anybody's hands if your side loses. So they worked for about 50 years to try to figure out who was there, and some of these people interviewed 50 years later about what they thought. And the best they were able to do was figure out names for about 150 people. We know there are a lot more than that. We know at least 400 on the very first meeting at the fort. Now, the Palmers, knowing everybody knows who they were, on the second day, they and their friends are on their ship heading to the East Indies, the West Indies, never to come back, you know. We aren't going to take a chance on you guys losing and we being hanged. So they take about 100 barrels of powder. Here is a recreation of one of the barrels of powder. They also had half kegs. Tom Kerr has an original half keg, which was found in a cellar in Portsmouth. It's an actual antique. These are recreated for the 250th anniversary for the raid on Fort William and Mary. They weigh about 100 pounds. We figure about 100 pounds. It depends on what you look at, whether it's a couple of pounds more, barrels more, a couple of barrels less. It's probably 100 pounds. Now, General Sullivan didn't want to really do this. He goes out to try to convince a peaceable solution with Captain Cochrane. Meanwhile, these guys are breaking into the powder house, so that doesn't work very well. And later, here's all the powder. Good luck. So now he's got the powder he wants in the knot, and it's dispersed. At one point, half the powder is underneath the pulpit of one of the churches, so he didn't want any real fiery sermons at that point. But it's all dispersed. And we've sent messages to the other towns that say what we have done here. Now, part of this, there's a myth that the defenders were all invalids. So that's why, an excuse for the Tories of why we lost. No, the defenders are not invalids. They are fully functional guys there for a period of time doing what they're told to do. And the militia attacks, well, no, it was not militia, it was townspeople. Very important, it was not organized militias. Townspeople saying, give us our stuff. Lots of shooting, no shooting from our side. However, Captain Cochrane loads 3 4-pound cannons. This is a British 4-pound cannonball. hurts if it gets near you. General Gage is more concerned about artillery than he is about muskets. He's got 1,000 guys who are trained to deal with people with muskets. Artillery changes the calculus, changes the power of the opposing forces. So he fires 3 4-pound balls at these guys. No indication that this is a ceremonial firing. In history, there are cases where you have an installation, you have a limited number of resources, and this huge force comes going to take the installation. So your only reasonable choice is to surrender. So you fire a ceremonial shot in the air, sort of ceremonial resistance, and then you surrender. And if it's a military installation, you're allowed to march out with your weapons and your colors flying because you didn't resist. That didn't happen. So he aims these cannons at these people he knows. However, with a muzzle-loading cannon, how you fire it is you have a touch hole in the back that you hit with a match. And you have a slow match on a long stick, and you touch it to the cannon. Well, they know how this works. So as soon as they see one of the cannons about to fire, the crowd opens up and the cannonball goes nowhere. So they don't hit anybody with the cannonball. Well, at least in front of the fort. One cannonball goes into a sloop going into the harbor, probably about just over the waterline. Another one goes into a guy's house across the bay. Another one goes into a guy's barn. So they did fire, and they fired in anger, but they didn't hit anything. Same thing. Every time they saw they were going to fire it, they opened up. And they remember, they only got a commander and 5 guys. 5 guys is not enough by policy and regulation to man one gun. So they got to work on this gun, then they got to move to the next gun and do that. And they had all preloaded their muskets, and they fired those and hitting anybody. So there are no weapon injuries. However, this is a big brawl. It's a hand-to-hand fisticuffs and sticks. Were there injuries? We do know that Sarah gave the Captain Corcoran a bayonet, which he used to stab, we think it's Thomas Pickering he stabbed in the arm. That's the only known injury. Now, these people getting beat over the head. You sure somebody got hurt? No records. Nobody went to the doctor saying, well, I got hurt. Well, how'd you get hurt? Oh, I was committing treason out at the fort. No, probably not a good excuse. So there are no records of anybody getting hurt, but we're certain people did get hurt here. Now, there was no initial desire to have a second raid, but now, and this happens today too, you get the popular fervor going. You get everybody's fired up. Well, let's go they got other stuff we could use. Let's go back to the fort. And Major Sullivan doesn't want to do that either. So he's over talking to Cochrane and wanting him to get this stuff more secured. He doesn't want any more problems. And while he's doing that, they break into the armory, and they take out some stands of muskets, and they take out 16 cannon. Now, this is a big honking deal, more than most people realize. They take 15 4-pound guns that shoot this type of cannonball because those are usable by moving armies, the militia. They have 10 field carriages. The original picture I showed you of a cannon on a field carriage, that's what they were looking for. They didn't have carriages for all the guns, so the carpenters had to learn to make carriages. They took out some muskets, serviceable or partially serviceable, not the greatest, but they took something. They left over 60 cannon. Most of those cannon too big to use in the field. So they took one 9-pounder, which is difficult. You know, a 4-pound gun probably weighs in about 800 pounds. So remember, in the cold weather, they're trying to manhandle these barrels with limited ropes and tackle and whatnot, and get them in the boats to take up the river before the tide changes and they can't get up the river. It was a lot of work to do that. And a 9-pound cannon probably weighs 1,000 pounds easy. We don't know exactly because we don't have detailed explanations of the cannons, and depends on what the cannon is made out of, how long the barrel is. There were at the time 15 different varieties of 6-pound guns, we know, in the British service. And that data is not available to us. We figure over the 2 days, as many as 1,000 people participated in these raids. They took the cannon and the powder upstream towards Great Bay. They're having to chop the ice to get the boats through. Remember, Great Bay is fresh water. Fresh water freezes before salt water. So they're trying to do this. This is a lot of work in really nasty conditions. These are tough people. They make me tired just thinking about them. On the 16th, the Exeter militia arrives. Now, during all of these exercises, the governor learns of what's going on. He calls on the Portsmouth militia to come and help him. Nobody answers. Remember, it's divided. Leadership is divided. Nobody shows up. The Exeter militia is almost the governor's quick reaction force. It's the best manned, it is the best equipped, it's the best trained. It changes sides. That is the moment at which the government falls in New Hampshire. When you lose control of the military, you've lost control of the state, of the colony. Now, he's still in his house in Portsmouth. He's writing things, broadsides claiming everybody who went to the fort's a traitor. No way he can put together any kind of a trial to try these people. It's all noise. Some of his friends are coming in and out, other Tories. Then they hear about Bunker Hill. At that point, everybody really gets riled up and decide the governor's got to go someplace other than Portsmouth. So they roll a cannon up to his front door. That's sort of an indicator. But somebody fires a musket shot through the window, and he's there. He's got 2 young children, got a wife, got a couple of friends. They escort him out. He gets taken over to Fort William and Mary, where he stays until the following August, when he's evacuated by the Scarborough. Now, we know that these guys in the Exeter militia are all fired up. They're making all kinds of threats. That's loss of control. They don't have good military control of anything. So Portsmouth becomes an armed camp with no real military leadership. Except Sullivan tries now to get established. That's really the start of his real patriot military career. Now the can so arrives with Henry Mowat, and they have to abandon the fort. They can't support it with an armed ship like that. So they had been trying to beat the tides, because you can't go anywhere with the tides. Now he's a little bit later than he planned. He has to have a pilot to make sure he doesn't run into anything coming into the port. He runs aground. Probably an accident on the part of the pilot, but he runs aground, and that delays him. Every minute that delays is good. On the 19th, the Scarborough, which has got 26-pound guns, arrives, and now you have a sizable military fort. There's still interchange between these guys. They're willing to pay. They got money. They're willing to feed them. They come in, they get food and supplies to go back out to the ships for a while. So, you know, after all, the business of New Hampshire is business. We're going to keep the business going. Scarborough is the one who takes the governor out on 24th of August. Now, governor has control of the militia, no control. Wentworth claims treason, is evacuated. Now you have no governor. Now they really don't know what to do about this. Because we have no charter, all laws are done by the governor, signed by the governor. If the governor is gone, are the laws still valid? Nobody knows. What are you going to do? So they form a provisional government. That provisional government, to the consternation of the folks in Portsmouth, is moved to Exeter. And that is one of the, that's where the governments run from then on until we become a state. So we're the first colony to throw off British rule. That means that's a different psychological effect for the folks here. When our folks go to Boston for Bunker Hill, they go as free men, not under the king's control. We send the most troops to Bunker Hill under the best leadership, John Stark. Because most of you probably know about Bunker Hill. They fortified the wrong hill. If it hadn't been for the New Hampshire troops and General Stark, it would have been an immediate massacre. They'd have turned the left flank and defeated everybody right away. And it's New Hampshire troops that executed an orderly military supported withdrawal. And that's important because the Battle of Bunker Hill is the single biggest British defeat prior to the Battle of the Somme in the First World War, when they lose 28,000 dead in the first day. If you look at the ratios, it was a serious battle. Our guys. Now we think, did the powder go to all down the Bunker Hill? If you read some documents, it says, oh, all went down the Bunker Hill. No evidence of that. Now remember, you're dealing not with states. You're dealing with 13 separate countries. They have their own culture. They have their own desires, needs. They have their own traditions. You don't give it away to anybody. So we wouldn't have given the powder to Massachusetts or Connecticut. And those are the only two groups that were at Bunker Hill. Now, probably some of that powder went down in powder horns with the troops that we had. Our troops had more powder than the troops in the redoubts. So we were able to cover the withdrawal. A piece of trivia most people don't know is that watching this withdrawal, watching from Boston, is a guy by the name of Burgoyne, General Burgoyne. And he actually makes a formal statement that it was not a rout, it was an orderly military withdrawal. That's high compliment to the treasonous rebels. Very unusual from a guy who later is the first guy in British history to surrender an entire army, British army. So, in Great Britain, they've decided you got a real serious issue here, and the real formal war starts because they say, all right, do whatever is necessary to bring order to this. Governor Wentworth, of course, leaves. The Cochranes become loyalist refugees. Cochrane goes on to a good future in the Royal Navy. He does very successfully. He's separated from Sarah Allard, who does a lot of things. She was collecting tariffs while he was imprisoned in the fort. She ends up in Canada. Tough lady. The defenders, otherwise, other than Cochrane, they're on the Scarborough because they are material witnesses to what went on in Fort William and Mary, and now they're at the behest of the king for whatever questions they want to ask him. Langdon, of course, goes congressman, lengthy career. Sullivan, lots of things for Sullivan. Royal Navy comes in, they have all the tools, they remove all the rest of the cannons, not difficult for them. They also tab down a little bit of the fort, but not a lot of it. On the 31st of May, there was an order to stop provisioning the ships. So they drive off, start to drive off any attempts by the ships to come in and get provisions. Now, one thing that they did know, down at Jerry's Point, which we saw on the map earlier, there were some cannons laying at Jerry's Point from an old defensive position that was there. So they think, well, maybe we can come over to the other end of the island, we can forage for some stuff, animals or whatnot, and also spike the guns. And they're fired on by militia, eventually withdraw. But it's not any kind of a major battle. We do know that the Scarborough, having had some injured seamen, as we keep them from getting any provisions, did fire on New Boston. On Newcastle. And that's the only time that foreign ships fire in that area on our side. Let's see. So they stopped communicating with the Navy. The Navy doesn't like that. And we looked before, and we got Jerry's Point down here, we got Fort Point up there. Let's see if I... So, Lexington and Concord was really triggered by the loss of 2 cannons from Boston. Cannons, like I said, changed the nature of the game. So Gage wants these cannons back. He thinks they're in Salem. He can't get into Salem because they've taken all the boats and bridges off of the river, and it's late in the day. They're really tough in Lexington and Concord because General Gage was not happy. He said, "Don't you come back with empty-handed this time." So they sent more into Boston. But what's odd is that cannons being so important, there's no mention of the loss of these cannons to the king when either General Gage or Governor Wentworth writes their report. Nobody wants to admit a failure like that. So, yeah, just happens to get lost, you know. I would think Gage would have been much more interested in that number of cannons that had been stolen, but he's still looking for his 2 brass cannons, but everything gets overshadowed by Lexington and Concord 5 months later. Nobody talks about this. The whole scenario changes, and that's why most people don't know about it. We do not refortify Fort William and Mary. It's not practical. What we do is build 2 redoubts further up, just by the Narrows. In this period of war, the advantage is always to the fixed guns. The fixed guns have an advantage over the moving ships. Corsica, they had 1 Martello tower with 1 gun on it, held off the entire British Navy because they could not get by that defense of the harbor. So we just moved the defense further towards Portsmouth. We also had fire ships, chains, things like that. Later they try to decide they're going to burn Portsmouth, but that doesn't work out. In fact, it's British standard policy. If you injure or defy British Navy, your port will be burned. And he gives an order for 9 ports on the East Coast to be burned. Well, the job is given to Henry Moore in the Canso, and he's given 4 other ships to go in and burn these ports. Well, most of the ports, it's foggy, he can't get into them, can't find what he needs. And they definitely wanted to burn Portsmouth, but Lieutenant Moore and Governor Wentworth told him, "You can't get there from here. You'll get your butt shot off before you get anywhere near Portsmouth. You cannot, you're out of cannon range from Portsmouth, so you might as well forget about doing that." Because remember, we saw how difficult it is to go into Portsmouth, but we also have gun positions on both sides of the river, so that would not have worked. So they didn't. So he goes up and he burns Falmouth. Falmouth has none of the natural advantages that we have, none of the fort's advantages we have. In addition, he has a personal beef with the people at Falmouth because he had been arrested and imprisoned at one point. He was very familiar with Falmouth. So he goes to burn Falmouth. But he gives everybody a warning so everybody can get out of town. And he can shoot carcass shells into Falmouth and start fires. But he didn't set everything on fire, so he sends some boats with torches in, and they get shot at by the militia who's coming in the other end. But he does get Falmouth burned. Very, very well known. One thing that, on the last point of that slide, you can make an idea that maybe we actually had an effect little further along in the war. Because General Howe is the commander of troops at the Battle of Bunker Hill, he gets really spooked by this battle. This is a big personal defeat for him, even though it's portrayed as a success. The losses are so great that it's really not a success. Now, down in Brooklyn, he becomes very spooked over an entrenched patriot army. He never attacks an entrenched American position again. In the Battle of Brooklyn, he's moving up the to Brooklyn Heights, and it's getting late in the afternoon. Fog is starting to form. His staff wants him to drive through. His German commanders want him to drive through. He stops everybody because he thinks under the fog that the patriots are in fact digging in, and he doesn't want to attack them when he can't see them if they're dug in. Had they continued, they very well might have wiped out the army and captured or killed Washington. That ended the revolution right there. And that was because he was spooked at Bunker Hill, and New Hampshire played a key role at Bunker Hill. So, I mean, that's my take on what might have happened. So, that's the story of Fort William and Mary and our part in it. Do we have any questions on anything? Doesn't have to be William and Mary. So, good. Thank you.